Charlotte stared at the house from across the street, her heart swelling with pride. This was it. 10 years of working 2 jobs, giving up vacations, skipping out on nights with friends. Everything had led to this moment. She had saved every penny, cut every corner, and this house was hers. It was more than just a place to live. It was proof of her hard work, her resilience, her independence. She imagined hosting family gatherings, providing a safe, warm place for her parents to retire to when they got older. But when she told her parents about the house, their reaction wasn't what she had hoped for. Her mother, Annette, had smiled faintly but said little. Her father, Mark, however, had seemed distant, almost as if the joy he should have felt for her success was somehow tinged with frustration. Charlotte brushed it off at first, thinking it was just the usual anxiety from her father's side. After all, they were used to her taking care of things. She'd always been the reliable one. But when Charlotte asked her parents to come over for a visit to see the house, she was blindsided by their strange behavior. Annette arrived early, as if eager to avoid any real conversation, and Mark had barely acknowledged her excitement. It felt like they weren't really there to celebrate her accomplishment. Instead, it was as if they were waiting for something. Over dinner that night, her father dropped a bombshell. He told Charlotte that her sister, Carla, and her husband, Alex, were in dire financial trouble. They were on the verge of losing their home, and her father hinted that maybe it was time for Charlotte to help out. "You've done so well, Charlotte," he said. "Maybe it's time to think about the bigger picture." Charlotte's stomach churned. The bigger picture? She had worked for this house for 10 years. She had no plans of giving it away. But when she looked at her mother's face, she could see the desperation in her eyes. They were not asking. They were expecting. The days following that dinner with her parents were a blur for Charlotte. She spent hours staring out the window of her new house, questioning everything. Was her father's offer genuine concern for Carla, or was there something else at play? Could her father truly be asking her to give up the house she worked so hard for to help her sister, who had made a series of reckless financial decisions? Charlotte hadn't spoken to Carla in weeks. They weren't close anymore. Not after Carla had moved in with Alex, her husband, and turned her back on everything their parents had taught them about financial responsibility. Carla's marriage was a far cry from the traditional, solid partnership Charlotte had always imagined for herself. Alex had a volatile temper, often making Charlotte uncomfortable when she visited their home. But it wasn't just the marriage that troubled Charlotte. It was Carla's attitude, her sense of entitlement. But the worst part was that Charlotte couldn't bring herself to resent Carla completely. The guilt of being the one with a stable job, a house, and a future, while Carla and Alex struggled, gnawed at her conscience. She hated herself for feeling this way. Her parents' words echoed in her mind. Maybe it's time to think about the bigger picture. How could she, who had worked so hard for this house, ignore her family's desperation? One evening, Charlotte couldn't take the mounting pressure any longer. She decided to call Carla, despite the years of silence. She dialed the number with a mixture of anger, resentment, and an uncomfortable sense of duty. When Carla answered, her voice was lighter than Charlotte expected. "Hey, what's up?" she asked, as though there hadn't been a growing chasm between them. Charlotte hesitated before responding, trying to keep her tone neutral. "I've been thinking about what Mom and Dad said. About you and Alex," Charlotte said slowly. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "You don't have to worry about us," Carla replied, her voice defensive. "We'll figure it out." Charlotte clenched her fists. "No, it's not about that. It's about what they want me to do. I don't know if I can just give up this house. I worked so hard for it." The silence that followed felt like it lasted forever. Finally, Carla spoke. "Charlotte, you're being selfish. You have everything, and we have nothing. This isn't about you anymore. It's about family." Her words stung, but Charlotte couldn't deny the truth in them. Still, the audacity of Carla's tone made her blood boil. "I don't have everything," Charlotte snapped. "I have a house. You can't expect me to give it up just because you made bad choices." Carla let out a long sigh. "I'm not asking you to give it up, but maybe help us out, you know? You always were the one who had it together. Don't turn your back on your family." Charlotte wanted to argue, to tell Carla how wrong she was, but the words stuck in her throat. All she could hear was the echo of their parents' voices, subtly reinforcing Carla's sense of entitlement. "I need time to think about it," Charlotte said, and hung up before Carla could respond. The days after her conversation with Carla felt like a blur. Charlotte couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was off. She had worked so hard for this house, sacrificing everything. The thought of giving it up, or even sharing it with Carla and Alex, felt like betrayal to everything she had built. Yet, as much as she wanted to stand firm, the guilt gnawed at her. It wasn't just Carla's voice in her head. It was her parents' voices, too. "You have everything, Charlotte. You're the one who has always been able to provide for us." Her father's words haunted her. Was that all she was to them? The reliable one who would always be expected to make sacrifices? Charlotte sat in her living room, staring at the walls she had carefully decorated, imagining how it would feel to open her door to Carla and Alex, how it would feel to have them living here, occupying her space. The idea made her stomach twist in knots, but she couldn't shake the thought that it was all part of some greater plan. Was her father setting her up for something bigger? Or was he truly just trying to help his daughter? She thought back to that moment at dinner when her father had dropped the bombshell about Carla and Alex. The way he had asked her so casually to think about the bigger picture felt rehearsed. Mark had always been calculating, but this time something felt off. Charlotte couldn't pinpoint what it was, but she knew he wasn't being entirely honest with her. It wasn't just about helping Carla. It was about something else, something she wasn't seeing yet. The following week, Charlotte decided to pay a visit to her parents' house. She needed answers, and she was determined to get them. Annette greeted her with a strained smile, but it was her father's behavior that caught her off guard. He was unusually quiet, almost distant. Charlotte had never seen him this way before. He was always the one to take charge, to lead the family decisions. But now he seemed hesitant. "Dad," Charlotte said, breaking the silence, "I need to know what's really going on. Why did you ask me to help Carla and Alex? This doesn't make sense." Mark looked up from his newspaper, his face unreadable. "What do you mean, Charlotte? They need your help. You're the one who has the means to do it." "I've always helped, but this feels different," Charlotte said, her voice shaking with frustration. "What aren't you telling me?" For a moment, there was no answer. Then Mark set the paper down and sighed, rubbing his forehead. "It's not just about Carla, Charlotte," he finally admitted, his voice low. "Your mother and we've been going through some financial problems ourselves. The house we've been living in, it's not ours anymore." Charlotte's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean? You lost the house?" Mark nodded. "We've been struggling for a while. Your mother didn't want to tell you, but I knew you needed to know. We didn't want you to feel burdened by it, but now, well, you're the only one left who can help us." Charlotte stood frozen, the weight of his words crashing down on her. For years, she had assumed her parents were comfortable, that they had everything under control. But now, it seemed like they had been hiding their financial troubles from her all along. "I didn't ask for this," she whispered, feeling a surge of anger. "I didn't ask to be the one who has to fix everything." Her father's expression softened. "I know, sweetheart, but it's always been you. You've always been the one to make things right." Charlotte's mind was racing. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. This wasn't just about helping Carla. It was about a much deeper issue. As she left her parents' house that evening, her mind was a whirlwind of emotions. She felt betrayed, not just by her sister, but by the very people who had always told her she could rely on them. They had been hiding their struggles from her, and now they expected her to carry the weight of their failures. The weight of her father's admission hung over Charlotte like a dark cloud. For the next few days, she found herself restless, unable to focus on anything. Every time she tried to immerse herself in the comfort of her home, the house she had worked so tirelessly for, she felt a creeping sense of resentment. This wasn't the dream she had worked for. It was becoming a cage, suffocating under the pressure of her family's expectations. She spent hours pacing the living room, her hands clenched into fists. The anger bubbled up, then dissipated, only to return again with a vengeance. She couldn't understand why her parents had kept their struggles from her. How had they expected her to keep working hard for something that now seemed to be a tool to prop up their broken lives? The conversation with her father had left her questioning everything. She had always known he was proud of her, But this felt different. His pride felt more like an obligation, a demand. "You're the one who can fix everything, Charlotte." It was as if he saw her success as his own personal safety net, and Carla's problems were now her responsibility too. Charlotte tried to reach out to Carla again, but every time she dialed her number, she hesitated, unsure of what to say. The words, "I can't do this," were on the tip of her tongue, but she didn't know if she could handle the aftermath. Carla had never been one to understand boundaries, and this situation was pushing them further apart. Finally, Charlotte decided to take matters into her own hands. She needed answers, not just from her parents, but from herself. She couldn't let herself be a pawn in their game of family dynamics any longer. She needed to make a decision that would put her in control, even if it meant facing the consequences of that choice head-on. She made her way to her parents' house, determined to confront them once and for all. This time, it wouldn't be just about helping Carla. It would be about understanding why they had relied on her for so long, why they had never given her the chance to live her life without guilt and obligation. When she arrived, Mark and Annette were sitting in the living room, the same place where Charlotte had first learned about their struggles. This time, there was no air of casualness. Her father's eyes were dark, his face weary. Annette, on the other hand, seemed almost resigned, as if she had given up fighting for the truth. "Dad, Mom," Charlotte began, her voice steely with determination. "I need to know everything. Why didn't you tell me about this sooner? Why have you been pretending everything was fine all these years?" Mark shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Charlotte, you don't understand. We didn't want to burden you. You've always been the strong one. The last thing we wanted was for you to feel obligated to fix everything." Annette looked at Charlotte, her face crinkled with sorrow. "We didn't mean for it to go this far, but you've always been the one to carry us when we needed it. You always came through for us." Charlotte's heart sank. She hadn't realized just how much of her parents' burden had been placed on her. It wasn't just about the house or Carla. It was about years of expectations, years of assuming she would always be there to catch them when they fell. "I've had enough," Charlotte said, her voice breaking with the weight of her emotions. "I can't keep doing this. You've built a life where I'm always the one to fix things, to make it right. But I'm not your savior. I'm not your backup plan." Her words were sharp, cutting through the tension in the room like a knife. Her parents' faces fell as they processed what she was saying. Annette opened her mouth to speak, but Charlotte held up her hand, silencing her. "I'm not doing this anymore," Charlotte repeated, her voice firm. "I'm not giving up my house. I'm not responsible for Carla's problems. I need to live my own life." With that, Charlotte turned and walked out of the house, leaving her parents in stunned silence. As she drove back to her own home, a sense of liberation washed over her. It wasn't going to be easy, but Charlotte had made her choice. Now, she needed to figure out how to move forward without her family pulling her back into their web of guilt and obligation. It had been a week since Charlotte had left her parents' house, and she still hadn't heard from them. At first, there was a small part of her that expected her father to call, to apologize, or at least to try to explain his actions. But as the days passed, she realized that maybe her absence hadn't fazed him as much as she had hoped. In fact, she was starting to question if she had truly made the right choice. She sat in the kitchen of her house, sipping her morning coffee and staring out the window at the quiet street. It was strange, how different everything seemed now. For so long, her life had revolved around her family's needs. Now that she had stepped away, everything felt both liberating and isolating. The phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. Charlotte glanced at the screen, and for a moment, her heart skipped. It was her mother, Annette. She hadn't called since their last conversation. "Hello?" Charlotte answered, trying to keep her voice steady, even though her nerves were frayed. "Charlotte." Annette's voice crackled on the other end, sounding small, almost defeated. "We need to talk." Charlotte's stomach twisted. She didn't want to talk. She didn't want to hear her mother's pleas or excuses. She had already made up her mind. But the voice on the other end seemed so fragile, so distant from the strong, controlling woman she had known all her life. "About what?" Charlotte asked, her tone more harsh than she intended. I don't know how to say this," Annette began, her words faltering. "Your father and I have been thinking about what you said, and maybe you're right. Maybe we've put too much on you over the years. But Charlotte, you have to understand, we didn't want to burden you. We didn't want you to feel like you had to save us." Charlotte clenched her jaw. She could feel the familiar pull of guilt trying to seep in. She had always been the one to smooth things over, to fix everything. And now, her mother's soft, regretful voice was reminding her of how hard it had been for Charlotte to say no. "I can't do this anymore, Mom," Charlotte said, her voice stronger now. "I need to live my own life. I can't keep being your backup plan. I didn't work this hard just to give it all away." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Finally, Annette spoke, her voice trembling. "I never meant for it to come to this. I'm sorry, Charlotte. I don't know what we're going to do without you." Charlotte's heart ached at the sadness in her mother's voice, but she stood firm. "I'm not your savior, Mom. I'm not your responsibility. You and Dad have to figure this out on your own, just like I had to." Before Annette could say anything else, Charlotte ended the call. She sat there for a moment, the weight of the conversation settling over her. It hurt, more than she thought it would. But as much as it pained her to cut ties with her parents, Charlotte knew it was the only way for her to reclaim her life. Just as she put the phone down, there was a knock at the door. Charlotte's heart sank as she opened it, and there stood Carla, her face flushed with frustration. "Charlotte, we need to talk," Carla said, her voice sharp. "I've already told you everything I'm going to say," Charlotte replied, her arms crossed over her chest. "I'm not giving up my house." Carla's eyes narrowed. "You think you're better than us, don't you? Just because you have a house and a job, you think you're above it all?" Charlotte's temper flared. "I'm not better than you, Carla. I just did things differently. I worked hard for everything I have. I didn't expect anyone to hand me anything." Carla scoffed. "Well, congratulations. You've got your house, your independence, and you think you've got it all figured out. But you don't, Charlotte. You've always been selfish, and now you're just proving it." Charlotte's breath caught in her throat as Carla's words cut deeper than she expected. But she wasn't going to let her sister's manipulation work on her anymore. "I'm not the one who's selfish, Carla. I've been the one carrying this family for years. But I'm done. I'm not your punching bag anymore. I'm not fixing your messes." With that, Charlotte slammed the door shut, leaving Carla standing on the other side, her angry face pressed against the glass. For a moment, Charlotte just stood there, staring at the door. The weight of the confrontation, the emotional toll of it all, felt overwhelming. But deep down, she knew she had made the right choice. The days that followed the confrontation with Carla were eerily quiet. Charlotte had expected some form of retaliation, perhaps another argument, or a desperate attempt to pull her back into the family fold. But instead, there was nothing. No calls, no visits, not even a text. It was as though Carla had vanished from her life, and in some ways, Charlotte felt the absence like a physical ache. However, the silence only amplified the thoughts racing in her mind. The house, once a symbol of her hard work and independence, now felt empty and cold. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the wind outside, seemed to remind her of the isolation she had chosen. The loneliness was overwhelming, but she kept telling herself it was worth it. She needed this. She deserved this. But no matter how many times she repeated those words, the guilt kept creeping back. Was I too harsh? Did I make the right decision? The memories of her mother's fragile voice on the phone still echoed in her ears. "I don't know what we're going to do without you." Charlotte's mind replayed those words over and over. She had wanted to be strong, to remain unaffected, but deep down, she knew that part of her still longed for the approval, the acceptance, that only her family could give her. One afternoon, as Charlotte was cleaning out her kitchen, her phone buzzed. She froze. The notification was from her father, Mark. Her heart sank. It had been nearly 2 weeks since their last conversation, and she had been avoiding any contact with her parents. But now, there it was. An unread message from him. She hesitated for a long moment before opening it. "I know you're upset, Charlotte, but please understand, your mother and I need you now more than ever. We've lost everything, and you're the only one who can help us. Please, don't turn your back on us completely. We can work things out. Love, Dad." The words hit her like a punch in the stomach. The same guilt she had been fighting off for days came rushing back with full force. How could he say that? How could he guilt her into feeling responsible for everything again? Her hands shook as she set the phone down on the counter, feeling trapped in the web of her family's expectations once again. But this time, Charlotte wasn't going to let them win. She wasn't going to fall for it. She had made her decision, and it was time to stick to it. She wasn't going to let herself be manipulated anymore. Later that evening, as the sky began to darken, there was a knock on her door. She sighed, knowing exactly who it was before even looking through the peephole. When she opened it, there stood her father, looking worn and desperate. "I had to come see you," Mark said, his voice low, almost pleading. "I've tried reaching out, but I guess you've made your decision. I can't believe you're abandoning your family like this, after everything we've done for you." Charlotte felt a rush of anger flood her chest. "What have you done for me, Dad? You've made me feel like I'm responsible for your happiness, for Carla's happiness, for everything. I can't live like that anymore." Mark stepped closer, his expression softening as if trying to appeal to her emotions. "Charlotte, we're your parents. We've always been there for you, even when you didn't see it. You can't just shut us out now. You're our daughter. You're supposed to help us when we need you." Charlotte shook her head, stepping back. "I'm not your fixer. I'm not the one who has to make everything okay. You and Mom need to figure this out on your own. I can't keep carrying your burdens." Mark's face hardened. For a moment, Charlotte saw a flash of anger in his eyes, a side of him she hadn't seen before. But just as quickly, it vanished, replaced by the same pleading look he had worn when he first walked through the door. "I never asked for this, Charlotte," he said quietly. "But I don't know what to do without you. We need you, more than you'll ever know." Charlotte's heart ached, but she didn't let it show. She had made up her mind. She was done. "I'm sorry, Dad, but I can't keep doing this for you. You have to find your own way." With that, Charlotte closed the door, feeling the weight of the conversation settle over her. As she leaned against the door, a wave of exhaustion washed over her. It felt like the world was closing in, but she knew it was the only way forward. She couldn't go back. Not now. A few days after her confrontation with her father, Charlotte felt the sting of isolation more deeply than ever. Her house, once a symbol of achievement and freedom, now felt like a lonely fortress. The silence from her parents was deafening. It had been a week since Mark had come to her door, pleading with her to reconsider, and still, no word. No calls, no messages. It was as if her entire family had vanished from her life. Charlotte tried to fill the void with distractions. Work, cleaning, even binge-watching shows she had missed over the years. But nothing seemed to cut through the growing sense of emptiness. She couldn't stop thinking about her father's last words. "We need you, more than you'll ever know." The guilt gnawed at her, no matter how much she tried to push it away. Charlotte had spent so many years being the dependable one, the one her family could rely on. The thought of turning her back on them, no matter how justified it felt, was more painful than she had anticipated. She hated herself for feeling this way. "I made the right choice," she kept telling herself. "I deserve my independence." But with each passing day, the weight of her decision felt heavier. Then, just as Charlotte thought the silence from her parents might last forever, she received an unexpected visitor. It was late in the evening, and she was sitting in the living room, scrolling through her phone when there was a soft knock at the door. She jumped, startled, not expecting anyone. Opening the door cautiously, she was met with the last person she wanted to see, Carla. Her sister's face was flushed, her hair disheveled, and her eyes were filled with something Charlotte hadn't seen in a long time, genuine desperation. "Charlotte, we need to talk," Carla said, her voice unusually subdued. "Please, I know things have been tense, but we can't keep going on like this." Charlotte stood frozen in the doorway, unsure of what to do. Part of her wanted to slam the door and walk away. She had already made her choice, and she wasn't about to let Carla guilt her into changing her mind. But another part of her, the part that still cared about family, hesitated. She could see that Carla was not her usual confrontational self. This was different. "What do you want, Carla?" Charlotte asked, trying to sound unaffected, though the tightness in her throat betrayed her. "I'm not here to argue," Carla said, taking a step forward, her tone softening. I'm here because I need to apologize. I know I've been selfish, and I've taken a lot from you. I never meant to make you feel like this, like you had to carry everything for us. I've been an awful sister, and I don't want to lose you." Charlotte's heart clenched as she listened. This was the first time Carla had ever spoken to her this way. For years, their relationship had been strained, with Carla always demanding more and more, leaving Charlotte feeling like she was constantly being used. But now, there was a sincerity in her voice that Charlotte couldn't ignore. "Carla," Charlotte began, unsure of what to say. "You've hurt me. You and Dad have always made me feel like I was the one who had to fix everything. I can't keep doing it. I can't be the person who saves everyone." "I get it," Carla said quickly, her voice breaking. "I know you're tired, and you're right. I've put too much on you, but I can't lose you, Charlotte. I need you. I don't have anyone else." Charlotte stared at her sister, feeling a mixture of frustration and pity. She wanted to believe that Carla was truly sorry, but the years of manipulation and self-interest were hard to forget. Still, a part of her wanted to believe this was a turning point. That maybe, just maybe, things could get better between them. "I don't know if I can forgive you," Charlotte said quietly, her eyes downcast. "I don't know if I can just go back to how things were." Carla's face fell, and for a moment, Charlotte saw a flash of vulnerability she hadn't expected. She had always seen Carla as strong, but this was different. This was raw, real emotion, the kind of pain Charlotte hadn't known her sister was capable of feeling. "I don't want things to go back to how they were," Carla said, her voice steadying. "I just want you to know that I'm sorry, and I'll do whatever it takes to make it right." Charlotte's heart ached as she looked at her sister. She didn't know what to say. Part of her still wanted to help, to fix things, but the other part, the part that had fought so hard for her independence, was scared. Scared of going back to the old dynamic. Scared of being used again. "I don't know if I can trust you again," Charlotte whispered, more to herself than to Carla. Carla's face crumpled, and for a moment, Charlotte thought she might break down right there. But instead, Carla nodded. "I understand. I'll give you the space you need. Just don't shut me out forever, okay?" Charlotte didn't answer. Instead, she stood there in silence as Carla turned and walked away, leaving her with the weight of a decision she wasn't sure she was ready to make. The silence between Charlotte and her family stretched on, growing heavier with each passing day. She hadn't heard from Carla since their last conversation, and though Charlotte didn't expect a dramatic shift in their relationship, the absence still felt like a wound that wouldn't heal. She replayed their exchange over and over in her mind, wondering if there was something she could have said, some way she could have bridged the gap between them. But as the days wore on, Charlotte began to realize that this was just part of the process. She couldn't force herself to be something she wasn't. She had always tried to play the role of the peacemaker, the one who held everything together, but now she had to face the truth. She couldn't be the glue for everyone anymore. Her life, her choices, had to be about her for once. The loneliness, however, was harder to deal with than Charlotte had anticipated. Every evening, as the sun set and the house grew quieter, she felt the weight of the isolation. She had friends, but none of them understood the depth of what she was going through. They couldn't see the threads of guilt and duty that still clung to her, nor the deep-rooted fear of losing her family completely. One evening, after a particularly draining day at work, Charlotte sat down with a glass of wine and scrolled through her phone, absent-mindedly. Her thumb paused over a picture of Carla and Alex from years ago, before everything started to go wrong. They were smiling, carefree, the picture of the perfect family. Charlotte's heart twisted, but she quickly swiped it away. She couldn't afford to look back anymore. Just as she set the phone down, there was a knock at the door. This time, it wasn't Carla. Charlotte hesitated before walking over and opening it, half expecting to see her parents standing there. Instead, it was someone else. Her neighbor, Lisa. "Hey, Charlotte," Lisa greeted with a warm smile. "I brought over some homemade dinner. I know you've been busy, and I thought you might want a little company tonight." Charlotte stood frozen for a moment, surprised by the unexpected kindness. It had been so long since anyone had reached out to her like this. She opened the door wider, allowing Lisa to step in. "Thanks," Charlotte said softly, her voice betraying a hint of the exhaustion she felt. "I really appreciate it." Lisa set the dish down on the kitchen counter and took a seat. "I haven't seen much of you lately," she remarked. "Everything okay? You've seemed a little off." Charlotte hesitated, unsure if she wanted to get into the details of her family drama. But something about Lisa's genuine concern made Charlotte want to share. "It's complicated," she finally said, sitting down across from her neighbor. "I've been going through some things with my family trying to set some boundaries. It's been hard." Lisa nodded knowingly. "Family stuff is never easy, but it sounds like you're doing what's best for you. That's all anyone can do, right?" Charlotte couldn't help but smile at the simplicity of Lisa's words. For a moment, the weight of the situation felt a little lighter. It was strange how a small gesture of kindness could offer more comfort than she had expected. "You're right," Charlotte replied, her voice a little steadier now. I keep questioning whether I made the right choice. Is it selfish to walk away from them when they need me? I feel like I'm losing them, and it hurts." "Sometimes you have to let go to find peace," Lisa said gently. "It's not easy, and it's not wrong. But if they really care about you, they'll understand. And if they don't, well, that's something you'll have to accept. You can't carry everyone else's burdens, Charlotte. You deserve your own happiness, too." The words resonated deeply within Charlotte. They felt like a reminder of everything she had been telling herself, but hearing it from someone else, from someone outside of the situation, made it feel more real. After Lisa left, Charlotte sat quietly in the kitchen, staring at the half-empty glass of wine in front of her. The silence in the house no longer felt as suffocating. She realized that she couldn't keep living for her family's approval. She had spent too many years doing that, sacrificing her own happiness for theirs. It was time to prioritize herself, time to find out who Charlotte really was outside of the roles her family had cast her in. For the first time in weeks, Charlotte felt a flicker of hope. Maybe she wasn't as alone as she thought. Maybe, just maybe, she could build a life for herself that wasn't defined by guilt, obligation, or family expectations. The weeks that followed Charlotte's conversation with Carla were filled with a quiet sort of resignation. She had hoped for some resolution, some sign that her sister would come to understand her boundaries, but instead, there was only silence. It wasn't just that Carla had stopped reaching out. Charlotte had started to feel as though the rift between them was becoming more permanent, more unbridgeable with each passing day. But Charlotte was beginning to accept that perhaps some relationships were meant to end, or at least evolve into something else. She had spent years trying to repair broken parts of her family, always thinking she could fix them if she just tried harder. Now, as the silence stretched on, Charlotte was slowly starting to realize that some things couldn't be fixed. Not by her. There were moments when the isolation felt unbearable. She'd catch herself staring at her phone, wishing for a message from Carla or her parents, even though she knew in her heart it would only bring more guilt and stress. She wanted to believe that her decision to cut ties was the right one, but the emotional toll was becoming more evident. One evening, after another long, empty day, Charlotte sat in her living room and picked up her phone. She scrolled through her contacts, hesitating. Then, with a deep breath, she tapped on Lisa's name and sent a message. "Do you have time to talk?" It didn't take long for Lisa to reply, offering to meet up at her place. Charlotte welcomed the invitation, grateful for the distraction, but also for the fact that someone was willing to listen without judgment. When Charlotte arrived at Lisa's apartment, it was a small, cozy space that was comforting in its simplicity. Lisa greeted her warmly, and they quickly settled into the living room, where a pot of tea was brewing. "I've been meaning to ask you how you're doing," Lisa said, pouring tea into 2 cups. "How's everything going? Have you talked to Carla or your parents?" Charlotte sank into the couch, the weight of the past few weeks finally settling in her bones. "Not really," she replied, her voice flat. "I haven't heard from them in days. I don't know what's worse, the silence or when they do reach out. It just makes me feel like I'm letting them down." Lisa nodded, her expression soft and understanding. "You're not letting them down. You're doing what's best for you, Charlotte. That's what matters." "But it's hard," Charlotte admitted, taking a sip of her tea. "I've spent so much of my life trying to fix things for them. Now that I've finally set some boundaries, I feel I don't know. Like I've lost everything. Like I'm not part of my family anymore." "You're still their daughter," Lisa said gently. "But you're not responsible for their happiness or their problems. It's not selfish to take care of yourself. You've done more than enough for them. Charlotte sighed, feeling the weight of Lisa's words sink in. She had heard similar things before, but hearing it from someone who wasn't involved in the mess of her family made it feel real. It was a reminder that her own happiness mattered too, even if it felt impossible to achieve. "You're right," Charlotte said, her voice soft but firm. "I've always felt like I had to take care of everyone, but it's like I've been so focused on them that I've forgotten about myself. Maybe I'm scared that if I stop taking care of them, I'll lose my place in the family." Lisa smiled knowingly. Sometimes letting go is the only way to truly find your place. You don't have to hold everything together for them anymore. You can let go and start building the life that makes sense for you. Charlotte thought about this for a moment. She had spent years living in the shadow of her family's expectations, bending herself in ways that drained her. But now, with every decision to distance herself, she was taking steps toward reclaiming her own identity. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't without pain, but it was something she had to do for herself. "I don't know what the future holds," Charlotte said, looking down at her tea. "But maybe it's time to stop worrying about what I'm losing and start focusing on what I can gain." Lisa reached out and gave Charlotte's hand a reassuring squeeze. "Exactly. And you've got people who care about you, even if your family doesn't fully understand. You don't have to go through this alone." Charlotte smiled faintly, the weight in her chest lifting just a little. She wasn't sure if she was ready to let go of everything, her family, the guilt, the years of responsibility. But for the first time in a long while, she felt like she was on the right path. The next day, Charlotte took a walk through the neighborhood, something she hadn't done in ages. She took in the fresh air, the sound of children playing in the distance, and the quiet peace that had been missing from her life for so long. She was starting to see a future that didn't revolve around her family's needs, a future where she could simply be Charlotte without the weight of everyone else's expectations. The morning sun streamed through the windows as Charlotte sat at her kitchen table, a steaming cup of coffee in front of her. For the first time in what felt like forever, the house felt like home, not just a space where she lived, but a place that reflected who she was now. She had taken down the old pictures of her family, reminders of the pressure and the roles they had expected her to fill. Instead, the walls now displayed photographs of her travels, small moments of joy she had experienced on her own. Life had slowed down. The whirlwind of guilt, anxiety, and family drama had finally quieted. And for the first time, Charlotte wasn't running from something. She was simply being. She thought about the past few months, how much had changed. It hadn't been easy, but she had done it. She had let go of the responsibility of being her family's caretaker. The constant pull to be there for everyone else was no longer a priority. It was her time to focus on herself, to finally be free from the emotional weight she had carried for so long. The phone buzzed, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was a message from Lisa. "How are you today?" Charlotte smiled as she typed her reply. "I'm good, really good actually." Lisa's words had been a lifeline through this whole process. She had no agenda, no expectations. Just a friend who saw Charlotte for who she truly was. Not the fixer, not the dependable daughter, but the woman she had always been beneath all the roles she had played. Lisa had encouraged Charlotte to stop seeking approval from people who didn't truly understand her journey, to find value in her own decisions, her own heart. Charlotte had started doing things she never had time for before. She took yoga classes, joined a book club, and even started cooking more, experimenting with new recipes. She'd always told herself she didn't have the time for these things, too many obligations, too many people to please. But now, there was space in her life for joy. Her phone buzzed again, and this time it was a call from her father. Her heart skipped a beat. She hadn't spoken to him in weeks, and although she had tried to distance herself, there was a part of her that still feared the conversation would come with more guilt. She debated for a moment, her fingers hovering over the screen. Then, taking a deep breath, she answered. "Dad," she said, her voice calm. "Charlotte," Mark's voice crackled through the phone. "I've been thinking about what you said about the boundaries. I don't know if I've ever truly understood how hard things were for you." Charlotte listened quietly, her heart in her throat. She had waited for this call, for an apology, but now that it was here, she didn't know what to say. She had expected this moment to feel like a victory, but instead it felt like a surrender. "I just wanted to say that I understand why you made the decision you did," Mark continued, "and I can't keep asking you to fix everything for us. I've realized we've been putting too much on your shoulders, and that's not fair." Charlotte's breath caught. The words were what she had longed to hear for so long, but now they felt like they came too late. She had already let go. She had already stepped into her own life, and while part of her wanted to hear her father admit his mistakes, another part of her knew that this moment wasn't going to fix everything. "I appreciate that, Dad," she said slowly. "But I've made my choice. I'm not the one who can fix everything anymore." There was a long pause on the other end. Charlotte could hear Mark's deep sigh, and for a moment she felt the weight of everything they had been through. But then she realized it didn't matter anymore. The decision had been made. She had done what was necessary for her own peace, and the rest, whether or not her family understood, was out of her hands. "I understand," Mark said, his voice quieter now. "I just wanted you to know that we're sorry, and I hope, one day, we can find a way to move forward." Charlotte nodded, though he couldn't see her. "I hope so too," she said softly, before ending the call. The silence that followed felt different now. It wasn't oppressive or heavy. It was a quiet acceptance. Charlotte had built her life around the need for validation from others, especially her family, but now she was learning to live without it. Later that week, Charlotte met Carla for coffee. It had been weeks since their last conversation, and though the rift still lingered, they sat across from each other, their words tentative at first. But this time, it wasn't about guilt or expectations. It was about a new beginning. "I don't know if we'll ever get back to what we were," Carla admitted, her voice soft. "But I'm willing to try if you are." Charlotte paused, looking into her sister's eyes. Maybe things couldn't go back to the way they were. But maybe, just maybe, they could build something new. Something that wasn't built on guilt, on sacrifice, on unspoken resentment. "I think I'm ready to try," Charlotte said, a small smile tugging at her lips. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, Charlotte felt like she was on the right path. She didn't need to fix everything. She just needed to be herself,